The city lights of Richmond, Virginia, flickered in the distance as James Carter drove down a quiet road, his hands steady on the wheel. It had been a long day, and he was eager to get home to his wife Michelle and their two kids, Daniel and Zoe. James was a man of discipline and routine, traits he had developed over 20 years in the military and carried into his current life. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s, he had the quiet confidence of someone who had seen more than most could imagine. But tonight, something felt off. The road was empty, the usual hum of passing cars replaced by silence. James had taken this route home hundreds of times, but a glance in the rearview mirror sent a shiver down his spine. Flashing blue and red lights. A police cruiser was tailing him, its sirens blaring. James furrowed his brow. He hadn't been speeding. He hadn't run a light. He knew the routine, so he carefully pulled over, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel. He had dealt with situations like this before, not because of any wrongdoing, but because he knew how some officers reacted to men who looked like him. As the cruiser rolled to a stop behind him, two officers stepped out, hands hovering near their holsters. James exhaled slowly. This was about to get complicated. The lead officer, Sergeant Rick Dawson, a middle-aged man with a rigid posture and cold eyes, approached the driver's side. His partner, Officer Mike Reynolds, a younger, nervous-looking man, stood slightly behind him. "License and registration," Dawson barked, his voice clipped. James, keeping his movements slow and deliberate, reached for his wallet and pulled out his driver's license and military ID. Dawson barely glanced at them before shoving them into his pocket. "Step out of the car." James's jaw tightened. "Is there a reason for this stop, officer?" Dawson's eyes darkened. "I said, step out of the car." James took another deep breath. Comply first, ask later. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out, standing tall. The moment he was out, Dawson grabbed his wrist, yanking it behind his back. "You fit the description of a suspect from an armed robbery earlier tonight," Dawson sneered. James's stomach dropped. "That's impossible," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I just left work." Reynolds, the younger officer, hesitated. "Sarge, maybe we should confirm first." "Stay out of it, Reynolds," Dawson snapped before forcing James against the hood of the car. The cold metal pressed into James's chest as Dawson slapped the cuffs on his wrists. "You're under arrest." James closed his eyes, steadying his breathing. They had no idea who they had just arrested. As James sat in the back of the patrol car, his hands cuffed behind him, he watched Dawson smirk as he spoke into his radio. "Suspect in custody, bringing him in for questioning." James didn't fight, didn't argue. He had learned long ago that men like Dawson didn't listen. They only reacted. The ride to the precinct was silent except for Dawson's occasional glance in the rearview mirror, as if expecting James to beg for mercy. James remained calm. When they arrived at the station, he was led through a maze of desks and fluorescent-lit hallways until he was forced into a chair inside an interrogation room. Dawson leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "So, you want to start talking?" he asked with a smirk. James lifted his gaze, steady and unwavering. "I think you should call your captain first." Dawson laughed. "Oh, you think you're important?" James didn't blink. "I know I am." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Dawson's face. Still, he ignored James's request and turned to Reynolds. "Book him." Reynolds hesitated. "Sarge, maybe we should double-check. He did have a military ID." Before Dawson could respond, the door slammed open. A commanding voice filled the room. "What the hell is going on here?" Captain Andrew Fields, a high-ranking official in the state's police department, stood in the doorway, his face flushed with anger. Dawson straightened. "Captain, we just arrested a suspect matching—" "Shut up, Dawson!" The room fell silent. The captain's eyes locked on James, and then his face went pale. "Oh my God!" Reynolds looked between them, confused. "Sir?" Captain Fields took a step forward. "Uncuff him, now!" Dawson stammered. "But, sir—" "I said now!" With shaking hands, Reynolds unlocked the cuffs. James rubbed his wrists, standing up to his full height. Captain Fields turned to Dawson, his voice like ice. "Do you have any idea who this man is?" Dawson's mouth opened and closed. He didn't. James looked him in the eye and, for the first time, spoke with authority. "My name is James Carter, U.S. Navy Admiral, Head of Homeland Security for the Eastern Seaboard." The blood drained from Dawson's face. James pulled a second badge from his jacket pocket, the one he hadn't shown before. It gleamed under the interrogation room lights. Captain Fields sighed heavily. "You just arrested one of the highest-ranking military officials in the country." The room was deathly silent. Then James stepped closer, his voice controlled but firm. "And I promise you, this will not be forgotten." Within hours, the station was in chaos. Dawson was immediately suspended pending an internal investigation. Officer Reynolds, who had tried to question the arrest, was given a chance to transfer out of Dawson's unit. News of the wrongful arrest of a high-ranking official spread quickly. James, however, wasn't just interested in clearing his name. He wanted real change. A week later, he stood at a press conference addressing reporters. "This isn't just about me," he said. "This is about every innocent person who has been mistreated because of assumptions, because of racial bias, because of a system that allows officers like Dawson to operate unchecked." He took a deep breath. "We need accountability. We need reform, and I intend to make sure that happens." The cameras flashed and the world listened. Dawson's career was over. Within a month, he was fired and lost his pension. James, however, continued his mission. He used his experience to push for stronger policies, not just for high-ranking officials like himself, but for ordinary citizens who didn't have badges to protect them. One evening, as he walked into his home, Michelle met him at the door with a knowing smile. "Did you make a difference today?" she asked. James pulled her into a hug, his voice calm but resolute. "I'd like to think so, but there's more work to be done." And with that, he prepared for the next battle. Because justice was never just about one person. It was about changing the system for good.